Hi, I'm Raymond Simonson. I'm the CEO of JW3, London's Jewish Community Centre and the UK's only Jewish arts and culture venue of its kind. Sadly, as you know, we've had to temporarily close our doors at the moment. We've got to think about people's health and safety, and we're listening to government advice. But just because we've stopped doing what we normally do in the way that we do it, it doesn't mean we have to completely stop what we're doing and what we're best at. And that is to increase the quality, variety and volume of Jewish conversation in London and beyond. So we've got some treats for you. We are going to put on a whole load of our digital archive that we've been building up over the last 6 years of some amazing events. We're going to make them absolutely free of charge to you. And whilst you sit down with a cup of tea and put your feet up and watch this amazing thing you're about to see now, our team are going to be planning for a whole bunch of events that we're going to put on digitally over the coming months. For now, this one's on us, it's free. But you know, everything that we do costs money. And at the moment, we don't have the same income streams that we've got. So if you can spare a few pennies, a few shekels, if you can click donate online, that'll be really wonderful. We'd be so grateful for it. If you can do that, that's great. But either way, please sit back and enjoy. We'll see you again soon.
Writer, journalist and editor onto the stage. He will introduce Laurence as well, and I'm incredibly excited to hear them.
Hello. Thank you everyone, welcome to JW3. Hello. I feel I've come to my own memorial service. Or Kansas Customer Convention. Thank you everyone, the Laurence Myers fan club, for coming out tonight. The Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Elton John, David Bowie, Donna Summer. Laurence Myers has worked with them all. Peter Grant, Don Arden, Alan Klein, Andrew Loog Oldham, Colonel Tom Parker. Laurence Myers has negotiated, or indeed argued, with them all. Andrea Bocelli, Rod Stewart, Queen. Laurence Myers has rejected them all as talentless no-hopers. So the biggest stars in music and the biggest ball-busters in music. He even let Iggy Pop stay in his house, and he slept in Joan Collins' bed. Marsha's still with him, surprisingly. Not only did Laurence live to tell the tales, he did so with some wit, style, panache, and a great deal of humour, as we have seen in this wonderful memoir. The first of a series, right, Laurence?
First of 7. First of 7. Last one goes from 2090 to 2095.
Excellent.
You don't need a mic.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry, I got carried away.
Yeah, right. So we're privileged to have with us tonight this accountant, impresario, label runner, terrible saxophonist, and friend of the stars. Not least because this is movie awards season, and by all rights, Laurence should be in Hollywood right now, sipping cocktails with Renee Zellweger and comparing tailors with George Clooney. And that's because his latest project, Judy, is a BAFTA and Oscars frontrunner. All of which just goes to show you can't keep a good East End Jewish accountant down, even if it did take him 3 attempts to become a Jewish East End accountant.
This is true.
Laurence, we're going to start with a quote, and please forgive the language. It's not my language, it's his. Tell David to go fuck himself.
Yes?
About whom were you talking and why?
It was David Bowie. And what had happened was, after we had parted company, very amicably, and he went to be managed by a guy called Tony DeFries, and they fell out very, very badly. And after 2 or 3 years, they were on RCA Records, and RCA Records asked me if I could try and broker something between them. So RCA arranged this amazing, a huge suite, and there was a Bowie camp in one room, and the DeFries camp in the other room, and RCA and I in the third room. So I went out and I said, look, I have no interest in this. All you guys ever did was make me money. You're crazy. You're not putting records out. And if you don't put records out, it doesn't matter who you are, the public will forget you. So put some records out. That's all I've got to say. So I then went back into my room with RCA, and David had a lawyer called Michael Littman, who I knew, who was doing the negotiations for him. And he came into me very shamefaced, said, look, I'm very embarrassed, but David wants you to sign a piece of paper to say that you have no financial interest in this. What do you say? And I said, tell David to go fuck himself. Which might account for why the fact we weren't very friendly the years after. So that was that.
But nonetheless, he let you title your book.
I didn't ask. Well, I did ask him, but I didn't know where he was because he'd been dead for what, 3 years. It's a great advantage because I can tell any stories I like about David.
And he can't see you.
Yeah.
So all tonight's anecdotes are about dead people, to be clear.
Right.
To be on safe ground. So, Laurence, your first dream was to become a drummer.
Yes.
Despite the fact you could only afford 2 bongos.
This is true.
But then reality struck and you had to pick from what you call in the book the post-war Jewish mother's wish list.
Yes.
Doctor, lawyer, architect, dentist or accountant.
Yes.
Now, you couldn't choose and your mum threatened you with a job as a hairdresser.
That was the last one on the list.
Why, in the end, did accountancy get the nod?
Because the last one on the list was to be a hairdresser. And I didn't want to be a hairdresser, so I said I'll be an accountant. And eventually, after many attempts, I became an accountant. I was a very bad accountant. Actually, some of you could have been my clients, but I can now say there's a 6-year statute of limitations, so I don't give a shit. I actually then, I eventually qualified. I genuinely thought I would never get a job, and I met a guy called Ellis Goodman who had 2 dark suits and spoke posh, and I thought he's an accountant. So he and I went into business together, and that's how we started.
Who was your first non-musical client?
Mrs. Dalrymple. She had a
with us
boarding.
tonight?
No, she's gone to with David Bowie. Mrs. Dalrymple had a boarding house in Finsbury Park, and she was my first client. And Ellis had some clients in the whiskey business, so that's how we started.
Okay. So armed with the initials FCA, you had your accountancy firm, and then I believe Ellis bumped into Mickey Most on an airplane.
Well, he bumped into a guy that was going to finance Mickey Mouse on the airplane. That's
So
right.
this became your first deal in the music industry and the deal that ended you up in court, it seems. Can you explain that situation and why you didn't run from the hills at the first hint of the reckless, litigious state of the music industry?
I'm not quite sure what court case this was. There were many.
Too many to mention. So the investor and Mickey came to
Oh,
some
yeah.
disagreement.
So what happened was we were introduced to Mickey Most. Ellis introduced me. Ellis wasn't that keen because Mickey wanted his home phone number. And anyway, I had bought House of the Rising Sun. I was a huge fan. So I said, I'll take it. And then they fell out. The potential investor, Mickey, fell out. And there was a court case. And actually, to my shame, we backed Mickey because Mickey was Mickey and the other guy was just money. And that was my introduction to the litigious world of rock and roll. Where there's a hit, there's a writ.
You were coming in from a fan's point of view as well. You said
Yes,
you
very much.
bought House of the Rising Sun.
Very much so.
What was so special about Mickey Most at that time?
He had an extraordinary he was a record producer. A record producer is like, for those of you who don't know, or who aren't record producers, it's like a director of a film. Essentially, it's all to do with you. A record producer, someone could bring him on the tape a little tune on a piano, and a good producer will recognise that that is potentially a great record, and he will choose everything. He will decide who's going to sing it. He will decide on the arrangement. He will decide on everything, and he can make or break a record. And they're as important to music as a film director is to film.
So he became an important figure in your life, and so much so you set up 3 companies with him: Rack Records, Rack Publishing, and Rack Management.
He had a whole load, even Donovan, Herman's Hermits, Jeff Beck, Lulu, loads of people, but he didn't have any money to pay. So I said, all right, I'll take a percentage. And I took a share in each of these companies, the 3 divisions of music: music, publishing, records, and management.
So that was your first deal, but it was also sweetened by the fact that you liked this guy,
Yeah.
you liked the music he was making.
I very much like the music, I like the musicians, I like everything about it.
Okay. As you say in the book, I was now unquestionably involved in the music business and was really enjoying my life.
True.
You were 28, 29, and maybe this is a question for Marsha actually. How did that enjoyment of the mid-60s scene, what did it encompass for you?
Marsha, it's a question for you. She's lost her voice.
A lot of parties and...
Not a lot of parties, actually. Not a lot of parties, no. It was a lot of activity, a lot of gigs, a lot of recordings, late night, and a certain amount. We socialised a lot with Mickey. I didn't socialise a lot with artists. I socialised a lot with producers and songwriters. I really like songwriters.
Yeah, you do seem to have gravitated towards the talents behind the scenes more than the talents in the spotlight. Why was that?
Well, without a songwriter, there's no song, there's no music. It's like, without a script writer. Everything starts with the written word. And songwriters are very important. There's a couple. Is Don Black here? Jeff Morrow here? Yeah. Songwriters?
Yeah. I'm learning so much tonight. I'm
Well,
learning what a producer does.
I know. Well, you never know. Anyway, this Morrow wrote for Presley and for Barry Manilow, and Don Black, of course, wrote the Bond films, and he worked closely with Andrew Lloyd Webber, not on Cats, he assures me.
So, an early contact in this world was Peter Grant, who became the legendarily fearsome manager of Led Zeppelin. And you talk about having a meeting with the equally terrifying Don Arden, father of Sharon Osbourne, almost as terrifying.
More terrifying.
You took Peter Grant to a meeting with Don Arden. Can you describe for us the scene with these two heavyweights and yourself?
So very briefly, Don Arden had toured the Animals, and he hadn't paid them. And their manager was in America, and he started getting terrible grief from the Animals, and said to Mickey, will you go down and try and get the money? And I heard, and I was very new, this was weeks in to my being involved with them, and they were saying, we've got to go and beat him up, turn the office over, he's a bastard. And I said, no, well, tell me more. They said, yes, mate. So I said, let me get into this. So I prepared accounts, and I got a letter of authorization from the Animals, and I said, take me to this meeting. So we go to the meeting, we're sitting outside, and Don Black, who was from Manchester, and he used, sorry, not Don Black, Don Arden. Don Black was also from Manchester. Don Arden was from Manchester. He used to be an impersonator and a singer, and he loved being the Don. In fact, in earlier life, he did get involved in violence over acts with the Meehan family, and he liked to show it off. So we're sitting in reception, and I can hear Don on the phone, which is apparently something he did quite often. And he's shouting, listen, you Christian schmuck, if I've got the money, I'll give you the money. If I go, fuck off. And we went inside, and he said, that was my bank manager. As a matter of fact, Don did get into an argument with Robert Stigwood, famous Robert Stigwood, and he hanged Robert Stigwood out of the window by his ankles, and that's a fact. So I knew all this. So we go in, and Peter Grant was 6'5", he was huge, and he starts taking the desk, and Mickey's saying, Don, and I said, excuse me, gentlemen, would you just wait a minute? Don Arden looks at me, he said, who are you pisher? So I said, I'm their accountant, and I have a letter of authority, and I have accounting, and you owe them £6,800. He said, yeah. So I said, well, are you going to pay them? He said, why? I said, you owe them money. He said, so? So I said, if you owe them money, you have to pay them. Why? This went on for a while, and now Mickey starts banging the desk, and Peter Grant's picking the desk up, very far wrong. I said, hold on. So I said, Mr. Arden, yeah? I said, do you know what you're going to do? Well, I'm going to do it if you don't pay. Give me your writ. Are you? He said. He opened a drawer, he took out a tray, he went to a window, he threw the tray out the window, and then said to me, second time we called a bishop, listen, you little bishop, if you're not out of this office in 10 minutes, you're going after the train. So that was my introduction to music. We became friends afterwards.
Did Mickey get his money?
The Animals, no, never. No, not from Don, no.
Okay. I mean, this seemed to be a bit of a theme running through the music industry in the 60s and 70s, and like many an executive, you had your day in court, several days in court as it turned out. The Rolling Stones appearance at Chichester Crown Court in 1967,
Yes.
in which you were famously papped on the steps.
I was, indeed.
Not for the last time in your life.
No, but all the photographs say, Keith Richards, Mick Jagger with Laurence Myers. I'm very upset, it should have been Laurence Myers first. But yeah, I'm in the photo.
What was your recollections of that day when the Redlands bust famously came to court?
Well, we went, Alan Klein was managing them, and the whole team just went, and we were bystanders in the court. And the whole thing was obviously a farce. They had some joints, and they'd raided Keith's house, and Marianne famously came down the steps wearing only a fur coat, which she took off.
Was there a Mars bar as well?
No, that was later.
Okay.
That was later. Half a Mars bar. And it was all over nothing. And in fact, the editor at the Times, William Rees-Mogg, father of the famous son, wrote a very famous leader in the Times saying about this is breaking a butterfly on a wheel. And it was ridiculous.
And you were there in what capacity?
Just part of the support team.
And was it nerve-wracking for you as part of the support team? Because at
No.
the time, the Stones' career, it seemed, was hanging in the balance.
Well,
they were outraging public decency, weren't they?
Well, it wasn't so much that. They took it very much as a joke. Everybody took it as a joke. I didn't take it as a joke, and nor did Alan. Because if they were done for drugs and had a serious conviction, they would not have been allowed to work in America. And that was important. So it was serious, but no one thought for a minute that there was going to be serious consequences, and there weren't. Well, they became more famous.
Mm. Your book actually opens with an exchange with Mick Jagger. What was the Mick Jagger in the 60s that you first met like?
He was very nice. These guys were very, very into their music. I mean, it's what really concerned them more than anything. And I had a meeting with Mick, and he didn't. It has been reported in the gutter press, the Times, that he asked me about pensions. He didn't ask me about pensions, but pensions came up because being an accountant, what you do is you try and sell your clients everything. So I mentioned pensions, and he said, well, maybe I can think about it. After all, I won't be singing rock and roll when I'm 60. And we laughed.
When you meet someone like him, when he's that young, was that 1,000-watt rock and roll charisma immediately apparent?
Not at all. I mean, a lot of these guys, their charisma is when they're on stage and they're playing their music. And it's like actors, you can meet an actor, he's the quietest guy in the world. He goes on stage and he explodes and the scene's over and he goes back like that. And they're the same, they're mostly just ordinary guys and they love the music.
Mick's reputation is also one of someone who's, shall we say, famously frugal or parsimonious. Is that true?
I don't know, because he didn't have any money then. So he got money later, we got him money later. They were famous, they'd had hits, but they had not been paid. And that was, part of my, I suppose, claim to fame. I got artists paid, and I got them paid more fairly than they were under their contract.
Mm. What skills do you think made you particularly well suited to doing that?
I met a guy called Alan Klein, who was the big bad wolf in the music business, and at one point he was managing the Stones and the Beatles. And the first meeting I had with him, he said, this is what a record, and in those days it was singles, and these aren't the figures, but it will do for the sake of the story. A single sold for 6 shillings and 8 pence. And he said, take off the purchase tax, what it used to be, take off the dealer, and this is what the record companies left with, and take off their actual cost of distribution, which was quantifiable, and they have got a margin of, say, something like 15 or 20 old pennies. The Beatles were famously paid 1 penny between the four of them. So they had this huge margin. And what I learned was, what I realized is that they could easily afford to pay more. So the standard thing was you just go to the record company and say, they're not going to work for you anymore. And they say, we have a contract. And you say, well, maybe you do, maybe you don't. But they are not going to work for you anymore. And you can't enforce a contract of personal employment. And it was very important because not only did they earn money, if the Rolling Stones earned money, it kept their salesmen occupied, it kept their vans occupied, it kept their factory occupied with the pressing. If you're a famous group, other artists wanted to come to you. So it was much more, and they could afford it. It had such a huge margin. So, and that's basically was my claim to fame, was going to record companies and just making them more honest. And the contract, EMI used to give a printed contract when they started. And it was like getting a contract from the Prudential. You just signed it, so happy to get it. And it was iniquitous, the deductions for this, deductions for that, we didn't pay on this, it was iniquitous. And as I say, they were able to pay more, and to be honest, I was very lucky. I was just one of the first people to understand it and to put it to them. So in the end, I became, with the record industry, I became like a gunfighter who never had to pull a gun. I'd walk in and say, oh God, it's Laurence. We give in.
The Red Adair of accounts.
The Red Adair of accounts. Firefighting.
I mean, it's because of these skills that Alan Klein sent you in to work with the Beatles in, I guess, 69, 70, when they were embroiled in civil war, they were hemorrhaging money through Apple, and it turned out they're on the verge of splitting up.
Yeah.
Was this the best of times, the worst of times for you to be with the Beatles?
Well, my concern was mainly with Apple, because everything they did was through their company, Apple Corp. They had this wonderful, wonderful building in Savile Row. And it was ludicrous because there were 30, 40, 50 people working there. Nobody in charge, nobody checked when they came in, when they came out. Everybody had a minicap account. Everybody on the staff had an account on the company's account for booze, and the whole thing was a joke. And so what I did an analysis and a report, really to show the Beatles what was happening. And John Lennon was there, and he came in, and who are you? And I said, this is what I'm doing, can I explain anything? No, not really, he was perfectly happy. And then later on in life, Marshall and I, we had dinner with John and Yoko. And that, I have to say, was a very special thing, because he was John Lennon, and he was very special. And he bought a huge house, a country house, I can't remember the name. Tittenhurst. Were you there?
Yeah, I was by the piano.
Bought this huge house, and he wanted to knock it all into one room. Now, I can't see the reason why you have a different house to piss in and cook in, and he wanted to do that. And the other thing he said that was very memorable was that, and I can't do the accent, he said the headmaster said to him, Lennon, put that guitar away, you'll never make a living doing it.
Given that this was the time when Alan was managing 3/4 of the Beatles,
Yeah.
wasn't managing Paul.
So,
Given that you were effectively Alan's man, how did Paul treat you?
with disdain. He wasn't interested with anything or anybody to do with Alan. And I met him briefly over the years. In fact, he came to a very important man in my life, a guy called Mike Leander, who's sadly died some years ago, and he's married to Penny, who is here tonight. And he was at Penny's wedding. He was at their wedding. And I went up to him and I introduced myself, and he didn't know me, but he knew my association, and it was a very short conversation.
I mean, Alan has frankly quite a toxic reputation within the industry.
Yes.
You speak fondly and knowledgeably of him in the book. What was he really like?
He was unbelievably knowledgeable. He had a style of, on a personal basis, Marshall and I were very close to him and to his family. And he showed me a lot. And the main thing he taught me, apart from explaining how the business worked, he said to me, when you go into management, Laurence, don't take 20% of the artist's money. Give them 80% of yours. You become the owner. And I did. And it was wonderful advice, because my pension has been, when some years ago, I sold off the catalogues of all these artists I own, Bowie, everybody.
You mentioned Bowie. He's obviously a figure, well, he's a towering figure in culture generally. He's a big figure in your life and in the book. Would you mind telling us how he came into your life and what your very first impressions of him were?
He came into, I met him very briefly at the Ivor Novello Awards, because he'd written a song, Space Oddity, which
69?
Yes, 69. And then in 1970, a lawyer I knew, called Tony DeFries, had met with him and told him he could get out of his existing management contract, which he wanted to do. And he said, you should come and meet Laurence Myers. And Tony came to see me first and said, look, if I bring Bowie in, and if it all works out, and if it's wonderful, maybe you'll give me a share, maybe. So I said, well, let's see how it goes. So Bowie and Angie, his wife, came in to see me, and weren't quite sure which was which, because they were both totally androgynous, white, red hair, makeup. And the one that was talking was Angie, because she was much underrated in his career, I have to say. David was a very quiet guy. He was very, very quiet and knew what he wanted. I raised the question of androgyny. He'd had one album out, which had failed.
Man Who Sold the World.
Man Who Sold the World. It was a good album, it failed. It could be that on the cover he was wearing a dress. Might have made some difference, I don't know. And the perceived wisdom at the time was that girls buy records. So, and they like macho men. Half the film stars, a lot of the artists were gay, half the film stars were gay, Rock Hudson, that they were all. And I said to him, I was very honest, I said, this could be an issue. And he said, no, don't worry about it. And I didn't. And the main thing that attracted to me was that he was a songwriter, and he didn't write love songs. Nearly everybody wrote love songs, and writers say, well, find another way to say I love you, another way to say you've left me. I woke up in the morning, sun came down, I got the blues. And he didn't. He wrote songs about other things, and I liked that. And also he sang in an English accent, which I liked. Whereas, I love the Animals, but lead singer of the Animals from Newcastle, I can't do Newcastle accent, but he couldn't have the word he said. And then he'd get into the studio, and it was like he was born in the Mississippi Delta. So I like that. I like that.
As we know from reading Lawrence's brilliant book and from
Brilliant book.
Brilliant. Available from all good bookshops at full price in the foyer afterwards. Don't go to Amazon, by the way. And also, as we know from his opening quote, telling Bowie to fuck himself. It was an up and down relationship.
Yes.
I found this item in Melody Maker in 1974. This is from a feature interview about Bowie's early days. Before Bowie's career took off, his manager, Tony DeFries, was quite desperate to sell him because Laurence Myers, the boss of Gem Management and Productions, with whom he was a nominal partner, was pressing him to make some money. To the point where Myers walked up to Bowie one day, pressed into his hands some songs by Tony Macaulay, one of Myers' main clients and co-writer of Love Grows Where My Rosemary Goes, and said, "These are the songs you should be recording." Bowie walked away, insulted.
I never knew.
Do you remember this?
Was I there? I don't remember. It sounds very likely.
So you were so underwhelmed by Bowie's hunky-dory tunes.
No, I tell you what it was.
Love Grows.
I left practice because I hated it, and I left practice, and I started a production company, and I had two producers. I had Tony Macaulay and Mike Leander. Tony Macaulay gave me instant hit. First, within a month of leaving practice, starting a company, I had a huge hit with Love Grows. And then he wrote another hit, John Johnson the Bandwagon. He was a hit machine. And Bowie was not having success. So I don't remember it, and I'll deny it. But amongst friends, it sounds quite probable.
So Bowie could have been a much bigger star if you listened to you.
Listen to me.
Listen to
Yeah.
You then moved at some juncture into Arcade Records.
I did.
Which brought you into the orbit of Elvis Presley and
Yes.
Colonel Tom Parker.
Yes.
Another fearsome cigar chomping big
Yeah.
bad wolf of the music industry.
Yeah.
How was it working with those guys?
Well, Arcade Records started because if you're Jewish, you have a brother-in-law. You just have one. And I had two, and they were in the business of selling gadgets on television, plastic things, anything, doesn't really matter. And I was in the plastic business because I was selling records. And Michael would say, "Oh, the problem with the plastic business, we have to make a mold, and it's very expensive to develop." And I said, "Well, my plastic business just, if it doesn't work, you put another bit." And they had a great rivalry called K-Tel. And K-Tel in America put out a record. They'd not been in the record business before, they were in the same gadget business, of a polka record, which sold hundreds of thousands of records in America. And Michael said to me, "Can't we do it in England?" And I explained that, half of American were from Middle European, and polka was in their blood. I said, the equivalent in England would be Morris dancing. I couldn't see it happening. So then I decided what would be a good idea was to put a load of records, hit records, on one album. And they were all owned by different record companies. And I was in a unique position because in this business, you are as important as the people you represent. And I had represented the Stones, Zeppelin, Mickey, all these people. So I had great entree with all the record companies. And quite uniquely, I think, I was able to persuade the record companies, never mind what your contract says, and get around it. Because I first went to EMI, with the Ministry of Pop, and they looked at their contract and said, "Oh no, we can't put our artist with another artist. Your price structure, we don't know how to do it." And I battled through, and I got it done. And the biggest thing we ever did in the UK was Elvis Presley's His 40 Greatest, which sold 2 million records. It was absolutely astonishing.
Did that require a face-to-face with the Colonel?
No. My face-to-face with the Colonel was we had a gold record for Presley, for Elvis, as I like to call him, and L. And I knew RCA very well. So I had a meeting with RCA in New York, and I went to RCA in New York, and I said to Mel Elberstein, who I dealt with, I said, "Could you give this to Elvis?" And Mel said, "You know what? I have to go to LA for a meeting with Colonel Parker. I have to every month. All he ever does is bitch. There's no reason for me. Please come with me, and we'll see if we can get Elvis there." And I had a very good friend, Freddie Beanstalk, who was Elvis's publisher. He called me back and said, "I spoke to the Colonel. If you go on this day, Elvis has got a costume fitting, and he will come and you can give him the album." So we flew there, and then the costume fitting got cancelled, so Elvis didn't come. But I was left in the office with Colonel Parker, and Mel Elberstein of RCA, true to his word, after 4 minutes, said, "Excuse me, I have to go, you two talk." So he left me, and I was with him for a couple of hours, and it was very interesting, because he was basically a market grafter, which I had been. The one thing he did for sure, he was always up front selling merchandise. He had a 50-50 deal with Elvis. Whether or not Elvis got 50% of the cash, I don't know. But he was a very interesting man. He had a market grafter's mentality, which is, if it works, don't change it. It doesn't matter what it is. So Elvis did a film a year, a tour a year,
And never left
Vegas,
America.
never went outside America, year after year. They were making a fortune, and the Colonel wasn't interested in changing it.
Another big relationship you had in the 70s we have to talk about is Gary Glitter.
Yes,
Putting to the side the hideous crimes for which he was later convicted,
yes.
what was he like as an artist?
Well, my relationship with Gary Glitter, in fact, a lot of my family's relationship with Gary Glitter was 20 years before he was revealed to be what he was. And what he was like as an artist, well, I tell you, I'll be brief. Mike Leander, who I mentioned before, was a brilliant record producer. And he spent hours and hours in the studio perfecting a sound. And Paul Gadd was his mate, and he used to hang around the office. And he took him to the studio one day, and Mike had been working for months and months on this track, rock and roll. And he put Gary's voice on it, he put Paul's voice on it. He came and played it to me, and it was just, not very often where you are, a stone cold certainty to do with big hair. But Paul, at that time, he was he's about 30, which is quite old to be a pop star. He was overweight. He wore the worst wig. He came from Scheitelstrasse. It was the most terrible wig you've ever seen in your life. And we put it on, and we then had a discussion as to whether or not we should find some young guy, you know, person with more rock star material. And Mike said to think about it. And he came back the next day and said, I don't know. What I've done, I think you're right. I've given Gary co-writing. I've given him co-writing credit. So if it happens, he'll get something out of it. Because he's a very loyal guy, Mike. And then he came back the next day, he said, I can't do it. He said, I can't do it. You know, Paul, as he was, had been working since he was 15 as a rock and roller all over the world. And he said, I can't do it. So we put the record out. And it was the most amazing hit, and it got top of the pops, and it took off. In fact, it's quite a long story, but we put out. It's called Rock and Roll Part 2 was the hit. We made Rock and Roll Part 1. On the B side, I was too mean to record another song, so Mike just put a bit of guitar on. And to his credit, Gary went on stage. And there were no lyrics. It was all guitar. Took all the lead. It was just the rock. Hey, and hey there, give a hey there. And it was fantastic. And he did it really, really well. And he became a huge star.
Yeah. Moving on. You gave up the music business in 1980.
I did.
Why was that?
I wasn't having the success I used to have. Marsha gave up the music business a little before me. I had a band called Heatwave, who were a fantastic band, and I took Marsha to a gig, and their big hit was Boogie Nights. It was an incredible act, and with the Hammersmith Apollo, it was full, and all the audience, which is what you were supposed to do, hoo, 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 hoo. So they all start hoo, and I get up, and I'm hooing, and I'm saying, hoo, hoo, hoo. I got the look, you know, the white look.
I don't know what you're talking about.
I sat down and she whispered in the ear, I'm not hoo-hooing anymore. I just quit the music business. Shortly after that, we had signed, I hadn't signed, a guy called Edward Christie was running the label, signed a band called UK Subs, who were a punk band. I thought I should really go and see them. It wasn't my music. So I went to the Camden somewhere or other, and I went into this venue, and it was full of punks, and the band are on stage, and punks show their appreciation by spitting at the band. It's very, very attractive lighting effect. And I'm standing next to this guy, this archetypal punk, the Mohican, the chains, the leather, the Doc Martens, the beer. He's got Mrs. Punk next to him, and I'm watching the whole thing. I like Gershwin, I like Cole Porter. The lyrics were "Tomorrow's girl is pissing in your ear." That was one of the biggest hits. And then this guy started to vomit, and he vomited down off his Doc Martens onto my Gucci loafers. And the thing is, he didn't move. He could have gone, ugh, but he just. I thought Marsh was right. It's time to quit.
Time to quit, okay. So if punk was the genre perhaps you disliked the most, Which artist did you dislike the most? Was it Adam Faith?
It was Adam Faith. Adam Faith, not a recording artist, but one of my first ventures into music, into the theatre, was a musical of Budgie, for which I blame Don Back completely. He got me into it. And Adam Faith was the star. And he was the most egotistical, horrible, difficult man I've ever met in my life. He would, everything was say, Adam, would you mind doing this plug? I asked myself, would Marlon Brando do it? No, you wouldn't, Adam, but you're not Marlon Brando. And it went on, and at one point, we got to put, the Russell Harty plug show had 3 guests, and it was very important. So he said, Adam, you're on. I said, I want to do it on my own. You can't do it on your own. Anyway, we were back and forth to the producers, and they said no. So I said, look, last week, and I remember it was Dustin Hoffman, Sting, and Dave Allen were the guests. He said, well, there, I can't tell you the word, but it begins with a C. And that's what he was like. I hated him. I mean, he got killed in a helicopter crash. I don't want anyone to die, but if someone had to.
So the music industry's loss was theatre and film's gain, as we said at the start.
Yes.
You've not hung up your businessman's sense of a good opportunity and a good creative project. Judy is doing very well as it
Very
was.
well.
How would you compare the music industry to the film and theatre industry? Which is more fun? Which is most cutthroat?
Okay, well, it's very simple. I was a very big deal in the music business because of who I represented. And I could pick up the telephone to anybody, the head of any company, to get an immediate no, which is almost as good as a yes. And it is, if you think about it. And then I went into theatre, and I did okay. And also, London was the epicenter of the music business, not of the film business. But when I got into theatre, it was, because we have the finest of technicians, the finest of actors. So I enjoyed theatre. It just wasn't as much fun.
Is there as much money?
No, nowhere near as much money. No.
But the buzz of making a film like Judy, which has had great reviews, and I was privileged enough to be on the set of it, as you were as well, obviously, that must be really heartwarming to think that after all these years at the coalface of creativity.
Yes. Well, Judy, the film came about. I saw Marshall and I were in Australia, and there's a girl, a very talented girl called Caroline O'Connor who had worked for me, and she happened to be doing this play. We went to see her. It's called End of the Rainbow, and it wasn't very good. She was good, it wasn't very good. But I thought I liked the play. And the Australian producer, he never got in touch with me, and it's just one of those things, fine. And then a guy called Lee Dean, who's a producer I work with, called me one day and said, I want to do End of the Rainbow. And I've got this wonderful Tracy Bennett, so I did it with him. And for some reason or other, I got the film rights, which is a very unusual thing to do. You just don't do it. And I don't know why, I suppose because of my background in film, so I got the film rights. And we put the play on the West End, it was a hit, and we went to Broadway, it was a hit. And then Barry Levinson, the very eminent film director, called the office and said he wants to make it into a film, and they said you have to speak to Laurence Myers. So I then, I dealed with Barry Levinson, which was very difficult. He's a very difficult man, mucking us around. And I realised that I had not been in the film business for a long time, and I wasn't current. So I found a young producer, and I think if I have a talent, my talent is for spotting talent. He was a very talented film producer, made a film called Pride, which I liked very much. And I brought him in, I got him involved. And he really put it together. He got the money from Pathé, he did it, we spoke about it, I said a good idea, whatever it was. And Renée Zellweger, very good idea. And it got made, and she is brilliant. She is brilliant. And she should get an Oscar, but it's highly political, and sometimes people who should win an Oscar don't. But I think she will, and she deserves it.
Well,
and so does my wife.
Well, Judy's a hot property. Marsha's a hot property.
Yeah.
You,
Sorry, wrong way. Mars is the hot.
in that order. Yeah. And the book's a hot property. Just say, after this award season, say the book rights, Tonky Dory, get picked up. Obviously, Adam Faith can't play you.
No.
But who could play you?
I would like to think George Clooney. It would be Danny DeVito.
Does anyone in the audience have any suggestions of who could play Laurence, or indeed any questions for Laurence, please? Right up the back there, in the middle.
Who would play Marsha?
Who would play Marsha?
That's not funny.
You know, I could have been Sir Laurence Myers. I turned it down because the thought of being married to Lady Marsha. Anyone? No questions?
Laurence.
Yes.
Sorry, stand as a microphone.
Edward.
Hi, Laurence. How are you?
Anyway, this is the man who signed the UK subs.
Thank you very much. Laurence, how did you meet Dick, which then started off GTO Records, which became a massively successful
It was a massive. Okay.
hit off? I think I worked there for 18 months, and in that 18 months we had 20 top 10 singles.
GTO Records was, without question, the music business, one of my most successful ventures. I had a deal, I was talking about these producers I had, Macaulay and Leander, and I had a deal with Bell Records. And Dick Leahy was the label manager for Bell. So he's the guy we dealt with. And then the head of Bell Records, who had sold to Columbia Films, he had a big dispute with them and he got thrown out. And a very eminent, a man called Clive Davis, without question, the most successful, consistent, even to this day, record man that has ever been, he took over. And he wanted Dick to continue to run Bell Records. And Dick and I went to meet with him, and I had always said to Dick, you know, I'd like to start a record company, you could be my partner, and I will give you complete autonomy. Anyway, to cut a long story short, Dick turned down Clive Davis, and Clive Davis still can't get over it, and decided to work with me, and that's how it happened. And I've never made a better decision in my life, because we had the Walker Brothers, we had a wonderful guy.
Can I ask Don Black a question? Mr. Black, he was genuinely, couldn't sing more highly your praises in the green room before we came on. Can I ask you, what was Laurence like to work with back then?
Well, we all know and tolerate Laurence. No, he's wonderful to work with. He's a very funny guy. And we had a lot of fun. I don't quite agree about that Adam Faith thing. I mean, Adam Faith was difficult. But I think we've met worse people, Laurence.
We have? Maybe, we probably have, but you know, this was my first ever, very brief, that bastard over there. Mike Leander had written a musical, and I knew nothing about it. So I phoned Don, and I said, Don, I'm looking for a producer for a musical. And Don said, so am I. And we had a chat about it. I'm doing something with Adam Faith, and he said, there aren't any, Laurence. Cameron McIntosh is always busy. There aren't any, blah blah blah. And I said, well, if you think of anyone, call me. And I put the phone down. The phone rang right away. It was Don. He said, I've thought of someone. You. You could produce a musical. So my first ever musical, which was straight in the West End musical.
You forgot to mention the composer.
Oh, the composer, Mort Schumann.
One of the greatest songwriters.
One of the greatest and loveliest men. You see, I don't forget lyricists, Don, because lyricists always, it upsets me. No one remembers lyrics. Everyone says Burt Bacharach. What about Hal David, you know? Bernie Taupin. Anyway, Don Black. So
there's a wonderful story about that. Just
go on. I knew you would. It has to
get
stop.
the attention on me
Always
for a change. No, that's true. You know, Johnny Mercer was asked. The great Johnny Mercer was asked, "Don't you get annoyed when people say that was Henry Mancini's Moon River, and they don't mention you?" And he said, "It's nothing you can do about it. It's like being ugly."
have any more questions?
Yeah, I'm sorry to hog the line. There, but, one of the greatest things that you did, and every songwriter in the world is a benefit of it, is your Tony McCauley case.
Yes.
Which transformed the way publishers and
Yes,
writers
it did.
worked together, because at one stage it was an amazing rip-off.
Yeah.
And writers got really stitched up. But
Yeah.
that case went to the House of Lords. I worked with you when that happened.
Yeah.
Was
Yeah.
amazing.
Tony McCauley had signed a songwriting contract with some Americans, and it was totally iniquitous, the songwriting, the publishing contracts were. And to cut a long story short, and I really did. I give credit, I think, where it's due, and I'm giving myself a lot of credit here, because I masterminded that case because it was just wrong. And we disavowed the contract. We won in court. We ended up in the House of Lords, and the House of Lords agreed, and Tony McCauley was free, and that case has been quoted, and it got Elton John off. It's a major case. It's probably my greatest contribution to the business. Oh, thank you.
There's a microphone coming to you.
In an era of Spotify, Laurence,
Yes.
and the modern way,
Yes.
would there be a place for you, and what would it be?
I haven't the faintest idea. I don't know what Spotify is. It's something you squeeze. Look, I think I'm not in tune. I can't stand rap records, but I tell you something. That the lyrics of rap are more. They are poetry of the day. They are commenting on the day, and they are intelligent. Much more so than many of the simple love songs that were a success in my day. So I don't knock it, I just don't understand it.
It's Georgia.
Hello, Georgia.
So my son is about to enter the music business.
Is he?
What advice would you give him?
What?
What advice would you give him?
What if I don't?
Right, I'll go back corner there, please. Back corner. Thank you.
Now, I've known Laurence my whole life. He is my uncle. I could never be more proud to be his niece. But what I want to ask him is, after this achievement of Judy,
Yes.
you know, and your book coming out, and it being the most incredible year, where do you see yourself going next? Have you got any other projects?
Well, I don't really.
Did you not work like that?
I was asked if I want to manage anybody in the current crop. Meghan Markle. But you know what? I re-record Life on Mars, and by royal request, and it will be a huge hit.
All I'm saying is go on. Please keep doing the amazing work you do,
Thank
and
you.
we're so proud of you.
Thank you, darling.
Of all this galaxy of stars who've passed through your life, who's the one that got away?
Well, several. Queen, I was asked, Queen were being managed by a couple of guys called the Sheffield brothers, and they were very unhappy they were going to lose them, and they knew they were going to lose them. So they asked me if I wanted to buy their management company. And I said, I have to meet with them. I have to sit down. You can't just, you can't buy someone's services. And I was going off to America, and they said, you have to meet on Monday or Tuesday. I said, I won't be here. So I passed. And once again, you see, if I had another chance of being in the movie, wasn't it? Because if I'd have managed them, I'd have been in Bohemian Rhapsody. Danny DeVito yet again.
Because you said, who knew?
And the other one that I passed, I have a friend here called Jocelyn, who had a home in Terriciola, a tiny village in Tuscany, and her next door neighbour had a son who was singing in in clubs around. And she was saying, the mother was saying, being a good mother, Italian mother, like Jewish mothers, said, I've got to tell my son. And Justin said, well, my friend Lorenzo Myers, a grande impensabile, whatever it was. Anyway, so she brought me a cassette, and I listened to the cassette, and I said, he's got a very nice voice. What am I going to do with a blind Italian opera singer? So that was another one. There are many actually. I slung Rod Stewart out of the office.
Marsha, do you want to have the last word? Do you have any questions for Laura?
No?
She's dumbfounded, embarrassed and proud to the end, I'm sure. Okay, well I think that's us done. Thank you very much, Laurence, for sharing your wonderful story.